Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order.
All right, we'll take roll. Councilmember Nusma. Here. One sec. There we go. Mute mine. Okay. Committee member Livingston.
Here.
Chair Rikus.
Here.
Recording in progress.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Committee member McMillan.
Here.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Here.
We have a quorum and can do business.
Great. Do we have any public comment? I don't think I see any. None in the room? Okay. How about the approval of the July 9th meeting minutes? Do I have a motion?
Motion to accept them?
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. You take a roll call, or?
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Committee member Livingston.
Aye.
Chair Rikus.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Committee member McMillan.
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Aye.
Thanks.
Thank you. And if it's okay with our committee, we're going to move D3 up because we have Jason who is joining us via Zoom. So Hitesh, do you want to kick it off for us?
To keep it clean, I'll move item D3 for discussion.
Second.
Okay, good evening, the chair, the members of the Finance and Budget Committee, it is this side. Yes, so we have Jason Franken from Foster and Foster. They are our actuarial firm, and they have just kind of shared the fire pension, actuarial valuation, and the police pension. So he will go over the details about the valuation, and then we will answer any questions from the committee.
I think you only shared the fire with us.
The police too, I think I just did it because.
Just now?
I got this police, I think sometime this morning. You did not? Okay, let me check, yeah. Let me do it right now. Now, let me ask Jason to first go over the fire then, okay? Hey, Jason?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, can you go over the fire while I make sure that they have a police pension report available too, okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Can we
Okay.
bring it up on the
So-
screen?
Yeah, and I'll do one more thing before Jason goes, if you guys, I have like a summary thing so you get the idea, in terms of numbers. Do we have that thing, Mike? Oh, right here. So this is.
Yeah, let's
like-
do the summary
This
first.
is like a very high-level summary, and Jason can go into the assumptions and whatnot. So the first column on the left, you see state statute versus our actual report under the 100% funding. 15.7 million for the actual report and 13.8 for the fire under the actual report, 100% by 2040. State minimum, Foster and Foster provides that too, that what the required under the state statute. And you see the numbers 11.2 and 9.9, so roughly 21.2.
And Hitesh, that's at 90%, right?
Which one?
The
They
state
consider-
minimum.
Yes. So you would see the difference that we are contributing around $8.3 million more compared to state statute. Just for the, kind of information. The table below that compares this year's number versus the last year's number. So again, you would see the police has required 2.5 million more this year, 100% funding now. And fire requires around 1.455. So the overall is around $4 million more. And on the right side, you would see that gives you the number like, okay, police, we need 15.7 million, fire 13.8. What are the levies? Because as you know, we have kept the levy flat for the last 3 years. So last year we levied 10.3 for the police and 9.5 for the fire, which is around 20 million, 19.9. So roughly $9.6 million funding needed, and that's what we need to discuss together. Okay, I'll hand it over to Jason. You can start covering the fire, and meanwhile, I'll check my email.
Okay, so everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize for not being in their person this evening. I unfortunately had a meeting out of town, so I appreciate you allowing me to cover this over Zoom. If you flip to page 5 of the fire valuation, this summary here, this is the city recommended contribution. This is what Hitesh just hit on. We're seeing an increase in the contribution from 12.2 almost 12.4 million to 13.8 million. So there's a number of factors that are driving this, but the biggest reason for the increase this year is that the increases in the salary. You'll notice that, in general, the goal is to fund the pension plan on a level percentage of payroll. You'll see that even though our contribution went up by 1.5 million, as a percentage of payroll, it went way down. It went from 108.3% to 100.9%. So this is, again, based on the fact that we had increases that were around 14.5% in pay, and we were only assuming about 4.3%. So that is the biggest driver of the contribution increase this year, is the salary increases. And we will see a similar story on the police side. But if you flip to page 7, one of the driving factors, in addition to the large pay increases, we did see the number of active employees increase by 10. That obviously contributes to the increase in payroll, which went from 11.4 to nearly $13.7 million. In section B, you'll know we do smooth investment returns over a 5-year period. So whatever happens we've been assuming 6.5%. Each year we're going to get something, more than likely we're going to get something more or less than 6.5%. And when those returns occur, we recognize them over a 5-year period rather than recognizing them immediately. You'll see last year on the right-hand column, the difference between the actuarial value, that's our smooth value of assets, which is used in all of our calculations, was nearly $9.5 million higher than our market value. That means we had about $9.5 million of unrecognized losses, in the plan that were going to be recognized over the future years. This year, you'll see that gap went down considerably. It went to just under $4 million. So we had a good return for the year. On a market basis, the return was nearly 14%. We were assuming 6.5%. So we had a considerable gain that decreased the amount of unrecognized losses that we have. But we still have some losses that will be recognized in the future years, and those are driven by the really poor performance of the market in 2022. Flipping to the next page, just looking at the bottom 2 rows of the numbers here, you'll see that the funded ratio did go up a little bit from 50.9% to 51.4%, but our market value, our unrecognized liability, our unfunded actuarial accrued liability increased from 104.5 million to 111.7 million. Flipping to page 10, this shows the development of the contribution requirement. The first part of it is the normal cost. That's the value of the benefits that are earned by active employees. You'll see that it did go up by $700,000 or $600,000 from 3.3 to 3.9, but as a percentage of payroll, you'll see that it did go down from 29.1 to 28.7. The reason it went down as a percentage of payroll is that we have a greater proportion of the active employees earning Tier 2 benefits this year than last year. And since those Tier 2 benefits are not as generous, we will see that number trend down over time until all the Tier 1 people have retired or left the fund. This year, there's, we have, just one second, this year we have 55 Tier 1 people and 60 Tier 2 people. So this is the first year in which we have more Tier 2 people than Tier 1 people. So for those that don't recall, the Tier 2 was added effective at the beginning of 2011. So, within 13 years later, we are finally to the point where we have more tier 2 people than tier 1 people. Okay? If you flip to page 11, there's section I. Two things I want to focus on here. One is in section 1. You'll see these are the outline the assumed salary increases. We were, we expected 4.28%. We got 14.44. I think this has to do with a contract, new contract, or some sort of negotiations. But it was a big hit this year, which, as I pointed out earlier, was driving the increase. In the next section, you'll see.
Wait, Jason,
we
can
have
you
the
go to the
actual-
top section? Because I think that's really important to show our projected unfunded liabilities.
Oh, yes, yep. Yes, so section H, that shows our current projected unfunded accrued liabilities. And you'll see it's $111.7 million. Based on where we are with our amortization, we're down to a 17-year period. You'll see that we expect that payment to start, to reduce our unfunded liability by nearly $4 million this year, and then $4 million next year. And so as we get closer and closer to 2040, we start paying down that unfunded liability more quickly. Obviously, as we get closer to 2041, if we only have 2 or 3 years left, the funding could become extremely volatile, and so that's one issue with the current approach, is that as you get a shorter and shorter amortization period, the volatility becomes more and more. You have a bad year where you get negative 10% return, your contribution would skyrocket. So we wouldn't recommend that you ever get to a period where to the point where you only have a 3 or 4 year period left to amortize your unfunded liability. On the other hand, one of the proposed legislation is to extend the amortization from 2040 to 2050. And that's not an approach that we recommend either, because what happens, rather than paying down your unfunded liability by $4 million, by extending it by extending it by 10 years, you could actually see your unfunded liability see it go up over time rather than go down over time. At a 17-year amortization, like I said, we are making a pretty big dent every year, but extending that amortization period could have consequences on that, and really put you in a situation where you're not containing your unfunded liability, but rather letting it continue to grow.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Quickly, I just show the returns, the market returns, and then our smooth returns. You'll see that in 4 of the last 5 years, we've had solid returns. Unfortunately, the 1 year we had was a really bad year. We lost nearly 20% relative to our 6.25% assumption. So that is the big driver of the unrecognized investment losses that currently exist in the plan. But this year we did have even on a smooth basis, we did exceed our 6.5% assumption, and we've exceeded our assumption in 3 of the last 5 years. I guess flipping ahead to page 15, this is another page that Hitesh had mentioned. We do a statutory minimum contribution. This is based on a 90% funded ratio by 2040. Again, this is the amount that's required by the state to be contributed, but it's not an approach we recommend, because it's ignoring liability, 10% of your liability, and allowing it to continue to grow until 2040. It's not sound financial. It's not using sound financial principles to address your debt. And then finally, just quickly on page 27, this shows the development of the smooth investment, smooth asset value. The middle of the table shows you the gains and losses that we've had in each of the last 4 years. we recognize 20% of it each year. So the 2023 gain, we had about $7.4 million. We recognized about $1.5 million of that immediately, but we still have $5.8 million left to recognize. The 2020 and 2021, again, those were gains. We have, gains left to recognize there. But the big one was the 2022 loss, where we lost $22.5 million. Again, that's relative to our assumption, which was 6.25% at the time. So we still have, $13.5 million of that loss left to recognize. And so at the end of the day, we still have about $3.6 million of unrecognized losses. Like I said, that's down considerably from the $9 million that was there last year. So I'll turn it back over to you for any questions that you have about the fire report. Or do you want me to go straight into the police report?
Jason, is there a schedule here that shows the projected contributions by year going forward? Or is that something we have to ask to redo the projections that we did a couple of years ago? I don't.
Yeah, no, that's not part of our actual, our annual evaluation.
Okay.
The evaluation is a snapshot that calculates the financial status at a given point in time. In this case, it's 1/1.
But still, you're projecting the decline in the net liability over time. Well, at any rate, I think I would recommend for the group, it's been 2 years, there was this pretty significant change to the wage rates. We have a bit of a surprise here. We knew that wage rates were going up, but we're having to contribute about $2.5 million more between the two plans or so. Five, sorry. Whatever, more. Right? We're at almost 30 million, which is the number that we thought we would be at, I think, in 28. So I would just recommend that so it's 4 million higher, right? 2.5 for police and for fire, 1.5. I would recommend that we have Foster and Foster redo those annual projections so we can factor those into our long-term planning, because we are at higher levels of contribution than at least originally we thought. And we need to build that into our budgeting, because I think everyone's committed to make those, but we need to see, before we were maxing out at around high 20s, what are we maxing out at now? 35? I don't know. But let's just find out what it is what I would recommend. So we can factor that into our planning.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because it's good, to have at least 5 or 10 years, so. And just to remind everyone, this is with a 6.5%. You all have the data of the benchmark communities. We are lower than the benchmark communities, but we feel this is a conservative way to do the 100% funding going forward. Yeah. Well, I don't know, is it?
So one small point of clarification, it's very nuanced. What is presented here on the comparables is the discount rate, which is used to calculate the overall liability, as opposed to the assumed rate of return of 6.5 or 6.25, which is calculating like some of that. So again, it's a very small difference. They're pretty much everyone uses the same numbers. It's off by 0.25% either direction. But just to make sure we're acknowledging that could be flexed like about 0.25% given community.
And that's the more important number, right? It's what's used to present value to liability.
Correct. That's what's used that outstanding
for every
liability.
community
Correct.
Dominates the.
But I think to answer Leslie's question, if you go to page 17 of the valuation for the fire, you will see the recommended rate of assumption of return on page 17. If you could, there it is, yeah.
So I think that's probably a number we gave them. I think we all agree with it, but the actuary will.
No, that is his number. That's his number.
Well, Jason, can you answer that? Is that your number, or is that the number that they will use a variety of rates. But first of all, I don't think we have any disagreement on the 6.5, but unless you guys have a concern.
No, the important things that we're following are actuarial recommendation, and that's what.
So let's let Jason answer that. I think there's a nuance here too, that we give him the 6.5 and he opines that it's reasonable. I think that's how it works. Okay, well,
Well, Jason-
Jason, what is it?
Well, so historically, there's been, considerable debate about that, your particular assumption. In general, the actuary will, I mean, it works differently in several, it varies by community. In your particular situation, we presented we had an experience study that we did for the police fund, several years ago, and we did the analysis, and we showed them a reasonable range of assumptions, and based on the discussion with the board, we chose the 6.25% rate, or 6.25% rate. The city, on the other hand, has subsequently would request the numbers, the GASB numbers, be run at 6.5%. So we did have, and we felt both of those, both of those rates were within a reasonable range. With the moving to the 100% funded, it was agreed that we would use 6.5% for sort of everything. If you're asking me today, like I said, there's not one answer to this question. What's the best investment return assumption? I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen. But the data is, the expectation is a little bit different today than it was two or 3 years ago, because interest rates are considerably higher than what they were. And so there's studies or surveys that we use as the basis, and over the last 2 or 3 years we have seen expectations come up by 50 or 60 or even 70 basis points. So if you're asking me today, what I think, if I wanted to say what the best or the 50th percentile rate would be over a 20-year period, I would probably tell you 6.75%. But like I said, 6.5% is still, that's within a reasonable range of that. It's not, if it was 6% or 5 3/4, I would tell you that we're understating it. It's 6.5%, I think is definitely a reasonable assumption. But like I said, if you're asking me today what, based on the change to the environment with the interest rate environment, I think that 6 3/4 is probably the rate that I would recommend if I had to pick one single rate.
So we're being conservative, which I think is our goal, right?
Yes, that's correct.
I think
because
so, yes.
by assuming 25 basis points less, you're assuming there's going to be less investment income, so you're going to need to require, that requires larger, plan sponsor contributions to cover the liabilities. So you are being conservative using the 6.5 versus 6 3/4.
The state is using, I think, 7.125, so I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes, for fire. For police, they are using 6.8%. So there is.
Do you guys want to go through the police, or, maybe we can go through the police as well?
Okay, I can do that. You want me to do that now?
Please.
Okay, so a lot on page 5, a lot of what I just said with the fire applies here as well. The plan is a little bit larger. From well, I guess it's not terribly larger, but the impact is a little bit larger because the increases were, the salary increases were 20% for this plan versus the 14+% that we saw on fire, and so as a result, you're seeing that the contribution is going up by $2.5 million rather than the $1.5 million. On page 7, Same thing with the payroll. It's $3 million, almost $3 million higher this year than it was last year. We have a handful more active than last year, but not, only about 6 more on 130 last year. So it's not a huge increase, but it does help contribute to a larger payroll. The assets, have the same. Last year was nearly a $15 million difference, meaning that there's a $15 million unrecognized loss. This year it's only a little over $2 million. So the return for the year on the assets was 17.3%. So you had a really good year on the assets, and our smooth return was 8.4%. But digging out of the hole from a 20% salary increase is difficult, and so that's why we're seeing the increase to the contribution requirement. The funded ratio for this plan actually went down, from 59.3 to 57.5, and there was nearly just over $18 million of unfunded liability added, and that's on page 8. Sorry. So the unfunded liability went from 113.7 to 132. So again, a significant increase to the unfunded liability. On page 10, here we have the same issue with the normal cost. It went up by $700,000, but as a percentage of payroll, it did go down from 25.9 to 25.2. From a tier 1, tier 2 perspective, in this plan, the police still have 73 tier 1 members and 63 tier 2. So there's still 10 more tier 1 people than tier 2. Most plans we work with at this point are, similar to the fire, where they have at least slightly more tier 2 people, but the turnover, at least amongst the tier 1 people, isn't as great here as it's been on the fire side. On page 11, this again, we have the unfunded liability. We're seeing that go down by about nearly $4.5 million based on the expected payment. Again, we are making progress. We're eliminating that debt, and that wasn't always the case when we were funding to 90%. Funding for 90%. Maybe in the last couple of years the payments were large enough to actually lower the debt, but we're seeing expected increases in that for a significant, until just recently, and now we're finally to the point where we're making progress, and a lot of that has to do with the shift to the 100% funding. The salary increases there in section I-1. 20% versus 4. Obviously, I don't think we're going to expect 20% pay increases each year. So it is a little bit of a one-off hit this year that we wouldn't expect going forward. The returns, have been very strong for this plan. Obviously, 2022 again was poor, but we've had nearly. I had over 10% returns and 10% more than our expectation in 3 of the last 5 years. So again, solid return. On page 15, this shows the statutory minimum, which is $11.3 million, which is almost $4.5 million less than our recommendation. Again, this is based on 90% funding. This is what the state requires the minimum payment to be. Flipping ahead to page 27, this shows, the gains and losses. We had the one really bad year, and we have about $2.2 million of unrecognized losses, but that's not very significant. But we are still in a bit of a hole. Hopefully, the returns this year are strong, and we will more than wipe that remaining unrecognized loss away with our next valuation. I guess the last thing, and I already talked about this, but on page 29, you can see that this year we have 73 tier 1 people and 63 Tier 2 people. On the next page, this gives you, a good indication of where they are. This is an age service chart, and anyone that's 50 with 20 years of service is eligible to retire. And so if you look at the buckets, there's only about 11 people that were eligible to retire as of the valuation date. There's 3, and 2, so just 11 people in 4 buckets. But if you look at the 45 to 49 and the 15 to 19 year bucket, there's 30 people that are going to be eligible here within the next couple of years. So I expect that there will start to be some considerable turnover with retirements here within the next couple of years that will really start driving down the number of Tier 1 people that remain in the plan, earning those larger benefits. I guess last thing back on page 29, you can see that the average salaries took a significant bump this year, both from Tier 1 and Tier 2, which again is the primary driver of the liability and contribution increase this year. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Jason, thank you. This was, very informative. It's a couple times we've been through it, so I think we're getting to understand it more and more. So thank you for coming on and going through it with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And again, I appreciate you allowing me to do this over Zoom this time. I would prefer to be there in person.
And I just want to add that I talked to President of the Police Pension, Timothy Schoolmaster, today, as well as President of the Fire Pension, President Mortel. Actually, the President, Schoolmaster, I communicated by email because, anyway, they both agreed to the 6.5 and the actuarial report. So I just wanted to let our committee know about that.
Do we vote on that, or?
I think we recommend it to City Council and they vote. Is that?
Yeah, I would say, I would like to make a motion to at least direct staff to prepare our contribution based on the valuation that we saw today. Just so we're clear, I would say that would be I'd like to move that, if someone wants to second that.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, and we can clarify whether it has to go to council. We can clarify, but understood point of staff directing staff to move forward with the valuation as is, and we'll figure out if it has to go to council or
Fund
not.
the pension based on
Yeah,
the
correct.
valuation.
6.5%, 100%. Hitesh, do you have anything else to add before?
Like a discussion item, action item, what we have right now?
It was a discussion item, but they are allowed to make a motion to put a vote in. Yeah.
So, take the roll? Yes. Or you can take roll or
Yeah,
whatever.
correct. Yeah, I was gonna say. So, are we okay? I don't know if we have to do full roll.
Aye.
No, I
All in
agree.
favor?
Aye.
Yeah, Councilmember Reed. Okay, online. Great. Thank you.
And can I also ask that we agree that we want to redo the projections? I think we need to, it wasn't that expensive, but I think we are higher, and we need to build that in.
I'm sorry, is
understand what it is.
Councilmember Reed online?
Yes, Councilmember Reed joined us online. Thank you.
In that case, we do need to do a roll call.
Okay, you would like. Okay, thank you for clarifying the rules.
Do you want me
Okay.
to
Not
state that
accurate.
again?
No, but we don't have to, but if you want to, we can.
So I'm just moving that we approve the valuation with the rate of assumption at 6.5, and that's,
And do the projections for the
Second.
last 2 years.
Great. Councilmember Newsma.
Aye.
Committee Member Livingston.
Aye.
Chair Rikus.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
aye.
Committee Member McMillan.
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn. Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. We are on a great path and look forward to getting the full projections and moving forward. So we're going to go to D1 now. Hitesh, if you want to lead the discussion regarding the Northwestern Stadium permit revenues.
I will move item D1 for discussion.
So far, we have, I think, one big check we just got last week of around $7.3 million, and total is right now 11 million, right? That's what we, 10.8 million. So obviously, you guys have heard a lot about the CIP needs, 3 big units, including the civic center. At the same time, what to do with the future bond issues, for the general capital needs and others. So what the staff thought, I think, is the last paragraph where we have the few options, because this is like a one-time. This is not a recurring revenue. So it's a one-time thing. So we have to be mindful of the fact that we don't try to use that to balance the general fund,
Is this 10 years or is it one time?
It's a one-time. This is a
Okay.
permit revenue. So it's
Okay.
only one time.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you would see the paragraph, given this needs one option to create a building replacement fund, that would be good to pay for the rehab, repairs, or any other thing for whether service center, civic center, or the police and fire headquarters. That's the one option we create, and set aside the money. Or alternatively, city council could direct the staff to use the one-time permit revenue towards general CIP, thereby reducing the need for geo bonds in next year. Because typically, I know Lara has 10 to 15 million CIP needs, and which is a tax-supported levy, and then obviously some enterprise funds. So obviously, we want to kind of, throw it out to the committee for discussion.
David, do you want to lead us off?
Sure. I think there's another option here that we should consider. Personally, I don't see a problem in using bonding to fund long-term capital projects. But aside from that, I'm concerned that what we just talked about on pensions, I think we should consider just leaving those funds in the general fund excess reserves to provide more time before we likely need to get to the date that the pension policy would trigger a calculation of a property tax increase. I really want to see us make these pension contributions as we are envisioning. And the longer that we delay any structural change to the taxes to continue to be on that path, I think is a good thing. So I don't really view there being extra money here. I think there might be for a year or so, but as we've seen, our contributions are higher than we thought that they would otherwise be. And I think we want to delay any incremental tax increase as long as we can. If 3 years down the road we realize, hey, the budget is balanced and we truly do have a permanent excess funding position, we would have capital needs then. But I just don't want to see this money used in really any other way than just help fund these incremental pension contributions that we are foreseeing over the next few years. So that's my view, and that would be another option.
Councilman Kelly?
Yeah, I just want to say.
I just want to note that I have my hand raised, Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll have you next.
I agree with David Livingston. I think this should also be returned to the unassigned fund balance of the general fund. I know, Hitesh, that you budgeted a $10.5 million budgeted deficit. So absolutely, I think in light of the increase due to salaries and everything else on our pension payment, pension obligation this year, I would agree. I think that's exactly where it should go. Thank you.
But let me just clarify, Councilor Kelly. When you say you agree with him, he said to put it as an assigned fund balance or restricted fund balance, right? Is it?
I think we can leave it in just general fund reserves.
Well, that's the main thing. When I do the financials at the year end, is it reported as unassigned so that can be used for any purpose?
Well, we can talk about the definition of it. I think it maybe could be used for any purpose, but we know that we have those excess reserves sitting there so that they are available to use for, future needs, including, because these higher contribution balances are going to continue to be a drag on the general fund. And we're likely going to be in deficit, absent these, that will be funded through the excess reserves. So let's get better visibility on with these new projected contributions as to what the general fund looks like. I think it's going to be in deficit, and this will buy us more time before we get to any sort of tax or property tax. We also have the issue of losing $2.5 million potentially with the grocery tax,
Tax, yes.
right? So there's a lot of moving pieces. I just don't want to see us throw $5 million into a capital bucket. So.
And Councilman Reed, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, I am also going to echo what our former chair Livingston said and what Councilmember Kelly said. I would like to see this go into the general fund. You know, whether we want to have it restricted to one use or another, I think I'm more leaning toward not restricted. But as Mr. Livingston said, I think, and I'm hearing what you said correct, and it's actually exciting to hear folks saying this now, is that we need to use this to make sure that we do not raise property taxes this year, that we buy ourselves more time, and that we can provide the relief that residents are seeking on their ever-increasing or seemingly ever-increasing property taxes, and allow us to continue to do the good work that we're doing on funding our pensions. So I agree with what was said earlier and hope that we can move in that direction.
Thank you. Councilman
And
Newsman?
one question. Apologies, Chair. Hitesh, have you provided an update on what you see? I know Councilmember Kelly just mentioned your projections that you've provided earlier about a potential $10 million budget shortfall for this year. Is that still your projection?
I mean, it could be there, and I think it's the next item, right? Where the mid-year, what are the actual numbers, and how does it look? You know, we have the kind of range because there are like some of those big factors in revenues, like PPRT and real estate not doing as great as like last couple of years. Some of those revenues doing good. So yeah, that item is coming up. You know, so you will get some idea where we will end up.
And when you say real estate isn't doing as, you're obviously talking about the real estate transfer tax. And when you say that it's not doing as well as it was or has done in past years, are you basing that partially on the fact that we're committing, a portion of those funds toward the reparations fund?
I mean,
is that part of the reason it's not doing as well, or is it just overall not doing?
Yeah, that could be the part. But even if we consider that $1 million, we are quite behind, right, Clayton? And I think it would come up again. You would see in our mid-year financials.
We're going to go over that on the next point.
Certainly.
So we're going to stay on this topic, but we will discuss the mid-year financials. Councilman Newsman?
Thank you. This course of action makes sense to me. It also, by putting this money into the general fund, allows us to cover our additional costs because we are going to have to, pay some extra for the inspection services. It also allows us to make up for lost revenue for a few years that we're not getting as much for in sales tax and liquor tax, special event tax. So I think that course of action makes sense. I do, however, want to acknowledge that the options that we are talking about and not going to pursue, which are a building replacement fund or using this funds for the general CIP projects and for parks, those are all very legitimate reasons. And those are all going to cost us significant amounts of money in future years. We put this kind of one-time windfall into the general fund, allows us some options down the road. But I would like to see moving forward, that we do a better job of funding our parks. And we all know that we have vastly more capital improvement needs than we have money. So, we are leaving some, I think we're making the best selection here, but the other alternatives are all worth some consideration as well. That's all.
Committee member, did you have no?
I do.
Oh,
yeah.
do, okay.
Yeah. Couple things. I absolutely agree with Committee Member Livingston. I think this is absolutely the direction we should go. I do have one question as to why this wasn't budgeted for, because we knew these permit fees were coming in, and it had the effect of making it look like we were in a deficit position.
Just, we talked about this during budget approval in November. They basically happened at the same time, and with the threat of a lawsuit kind of hanging over the stadium approval and whether or not the stadium would actually be demoed at the end of the year, we felt it was not appropriate and shared that with City Council that it wasn't appropriate to budget either the revenue or the expenses and leave that decision to be made once we had clearer direction on whether
But
the stadium was moving
The funds
forward.
now are actually here, is that?
The $10 million has been received and will be reflected in is reflected in our financials.
Okay.
So am I hearing the consensus is we want to go into general fund unrestricted? Okay. Did we give you direction?
Just a
Okay.
quick question, is there more expected before the end of the year? Do you have a?
Only a small amount. There's a little bit pending for some right-of-way street work that's going, maybe 100,000, and then there's some stuff for the temporary stadium at the lakefront, but that's only going to be about another 100,000. So we think we'll finish right around 11 million.
Okay, thank you.
And I want to thank everyone for their comments because I actually came in weighing more towards CIP, and after hearing everyone, I agree with the committee. In September, we are going to have a deep dive discussion on CIP, so we will be discussing that in September. Okay, can I bring discussion of mid-year financials? D2?
I'll
So
make a motion
moved.
I'll second.
Okay, got a few slides put together to walk through the mid-year financials. They're very similar to what we shared with you all last year. So first off, a general summary of the general fund through June. Our July financials should be posted by the end of this week. We like to use June as a good snapshot. Obviously, it's 50% through the year, so we would expect revenues and expenses to be right around there. In terms of revenues, we're at 51% of budget. Through June, we got most of that permit revenue that we just talked about in July and August, so that's not reflected in this number. But through June, we were at 51% of revenues and 48% of expenses. Really only, unlike last year where we had a handful of unbudgeted things kind of pop up throughout the year, we've really only had one, and that was the purchase of the Little Beans, the South End Rec Center. So that 2.7 million purchase is reflected in this 68 million. So that leaves us with a year-to-date net operating deficit of almost exactly $1 million. We have a fund balance of 48 million. That's 33% of budgeted expenses. Compared to our 16% policy. At the same presentation last year, we were at 40% of budgeted expenses and reserves. Obviously, a result of two things. One is the increase in budgeted expenses, salaries, wages, et cetera. Those have gone up. And then, as we talked about last month, the operating deficit that we saw last year, that's why we've gone from the 40% down to the 33% fund balance as of the end of June. In terms of revenues, no real slowdown in some of those economy-based revenues. That being said, February and March 2024 were 7% higher than February and March 2023. So we thought, wow, these economy-based sales taxes are going to be 7% higher this year than they were last year. But the last 2 months, we've started to see a little bit of a slowdown. So April and May of 2024, just 2% higher than April and May of 2023. So it seems like maybe we're starting to level off just a little bit on our sales and home rule sales taxes. Income taxes are way up, 9% over 2023 actuals through July. And as Committee Member Livingston alluded to, we are looking at the elimination of the state grocery tax effective 1/1/26. Not something that this committee necessarily needs to talk about as part of this budget cycle, but certainly something we'll want to address looking ahead to next year and when we work on our 2026 budget. If we choose to adopt a local grocery tax, we have to do so by October 1st, 2025. I imagine we'll have those conversations in early 2025. So this kind of covers some of the revenues that are doing better than anticipated and tracking at or above budget. We do have a couple revenues that are tracking well below budget. One of those being PPRT. They're down 42% through 4 months of returns through July. IML is projecting that these decreases will continue throughout the rest of 2024 and into 2025. Is down from our 5.5 million peak in 2022 and our $4 million return last year. We're closer to 2021 numbers than we were the last 2 years. These are a revenue that it seems are going to just keep bouncing around a little bit, really difficult to project from year to year. None of our other revenues see this level of decrease, but IDOR does provide a explanation for all the components that go into calculating this particular tax and how much we receive. Hitesh already talked about real estate transfer taxes. The first $1 million has gone to reparations. We are past $1 million at this point, so everything's going to the general fund. But they're down 31% compared to last year through June and down 41% compared to 2022 through June. This is a revenue that only takes one or two really big property sales to get it back on track. You can see in 2021, when we saw some really big numbers, we had some really big sales in July and November, so that's certainly something we may hopefully see this year. But at least so far through June, it's tracking really, really behind, likely a result of high interest rates. Although as those hopefully cool off, maybe we start to see this revenue pick back up. Just a few other bullet points on the general fund. So building permits exceeding budget, largely due to Ryan Field, but even outside of that project, we're still seeing a lot of permit activity, a lot of construction activity in the city. We know that amusement taxes and athletic taxes may finish a little under budget this year because of the smaller lakefront stadium. Other revenues doing just fine. Recreation program fees at our parks, ticket fines and parking ambulance fees all doing well. A handful of others like the state use tax, the telecom tax, natural gas utility tax. We may have bumped up our projection a little too high and they're coming in a little below that projection this year. Another important note, the City Council adopted the budget with a 4% vacancy rate. We've seen a lot of turnover and a lot of vacancy. So we are seeing some unfortunate savings given some of those vacancies. We're currently tracking around 8%. So we're seeing some unexpected expense savings on salaries and benefits because of that. And as I said, the only major unbudgeted expense in the general fund was the purchase of Little Beans at $2.7 million.
Where are we seeing those vacancies? Can you generalize to a specific department?
We know police year over year. We carry a lot of budget in the police department, and I think that they've not been able to fill a lot of those patrol positions, and their vacancies alone have generally saved what we anticipated saving this year. But we're also seeing vacancies in other departments too.
Public Works.
Public
Point
Works,
of
community development.
information. My understanding was that the police department has made significant strides in reducing vacancies.
They absolutely have made some strides in reducing them, but they're still probably our number one contributor to our current vacancy rate and vacancy savings.
I just want to say, I know from last night, I'm sorry.
No, maybe none of us should be talking now, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll skip to the next slide then. So this is a summary of all revenues. Note that we are now, following the discussion on the last item, we will include the Northwestern numbers in our projections moving forward if the plan is to keep them in the general fund. But they are omitted from this summary for now because we wanted to get that direction before we included them. So
Was the 1.2, that number in here, or no?
that has been included up in this first summary up here, but at this point now I'm switching to projections. So year-end projections, and I have omitted those permit revenues from year-end projections. So where you see green, essentially we think we'll bring in more than budgeted. Where you see red is where we'll bring in less than what we budgeted. And where you see double red, PPRT, state use tax, and real estate transfer tax, we're almost certain that unless something significant changes, we're going to bring in less than we budgeted. Where you see double green, we're almost certain unless something changes, we're going to bring in more than we budgeted. And we provide both a low and a high projection like we did last year. And you can see we're projecting to finish anywhere between 1.3 million under on revenues to 4 million over. So this is a window of about 3% in our general fund.
Given the discussion we just had earlier, that is now going to change.
Now that'll change, and you can add $11 million to both of those numbers. One-time permit revenue, definitely, because of that,
Right.
we were almost certain not to finish the year with a deficit. But that aside, this is where we were tracking. So pulling those numbers then into a summary so you can see our low projection and a high projection for where we think we'll finish in the general fund. We had budgeted a $10.5 million deficit. With the additional revenue adjustments and with the purchase of Little Beans and some other small adjustments as we looked at the rest of expenses throughout the general fund, we think we'll finish anywhere between an $11.7 million deficit and a $4.4 million deficit. So before you throw in the Northwestern permit revenue. So again, even in the high projection, we still think because of the upside in revenues and those unfortunate savings on the higher vacancy rate, we're still going to finish kind of like we did last year with a better deficit, kind of that conservative budgeting on revenues and expenses, that we'd finish close to where we budgeted, but still see that operating deficit. We do have a couple suggestions here that we do want to talk about as part of the next slide, and they'll come up again next month as we have folks from parking and folks from water present some capital needs. But there are fairly significant transfers that we do right now from the water fund to the general fund. It's about $4 million a year. And from the parking fund to the general fund, it's $2.9 million a year. Those do seem fairly high given some of the capital needs in parking and water. So we did want to talk about, and we can talk about it more in September, the idea of reducing those transfers moving forward. So general fund items moving into the 2025 budget. So these are big topics that we think will come up in October and over the next couple months. One are these funds that have very significant capital needs. We've already talked about a lot of them with no dedicated revenue. So in parking, they have capital needs that have been identified in order to maintain our parking infrastructure. In water, last year we projected year-over-year increases to water rates in order to address lead service line needs. In terms of vehicles, greater demand and need for more electric vehicles, which the upfront costs are significantly higher than gas-powered vehicles. You hopefully recognize those savings over time, but certainly the upfront cost is more. In CIP, we have park needs. In facilities, we've already talked about the idea of that building replacement fund and the high dollar needs for Civic Center, Service Center, Police and Fire Headquarters. And also in special assessment fund, a long list of homeowners waiting on necessary alley improvements. We're at how many? List of 80? 80 petitions pending for alleys in the city that need repaired, and the city splits those costs 50-50 through our special assessment fund. So again, all 6 of these things I just mentioned are funds that have no dedicated revenue other than the fees that people pay for the infrastructure in the case of water and in parking, or transfers from the general fund like vehicles, or bonds like for CIP and facilities. Or in the special assessment fund, there's that 50-50 match. So the primary revenue for all of these things I just mentioned is general fund, bonds, or user fees. So again, a very important topic as we go into the next budget cycle that just gets at the need that exists that we need to start to address. Ryan Field permit revenues, we've already talked about that. In the Good Neighbor Fund, $1.5 million was transferred to the general fund in 2024. This is the $1.5 million each year that the city has the flexibility to determine how to address. So we'll need to.
I thought that was 3 million.
So it's $3 million with,
of which 1.5 is pre-allocated.
Yes. So I'm ignoring the 1.5. So it's a $3 million contribution. $1 million goes to affordable housing fund, $500,000 to the sustainability fund, and the remaining 1.5 is up to the city to determine how to
We've
allocate.
gotten the full 3 from Northwestern.
Say it again.
We have received the full 3 million.
Yes, we've gotten that full $3 million
Thank you.
from Northwestern. 1.5 has been deposited in the general fund as the city council determined last year, and it was reflected in those projections as well. And then finally, grocery tax, again, $2.5 million when you pile that on with parking, water, vehicles, CIP, facilities, pension obligations, and you pile on a loss of $2.5 million that starts in 2026. It just culminates into some of these decisions we have to make as we move forward. This table, obviously small, it's the fund balance summary from our June monthly report. This is the one that folks at this committee level, we tend to present here to give you an idea of how much excess fund balance there is in those funds that have a fund balance policy. You can see these non-spendable, restricted, assigned, and unassigned amounts. Those are only adjusted each year as part of audits, so they are unchanged. These are the audited numbers from our 2023 audit. Communities don't change those throughout the year. But what we have dropped in is the fund balance as of June 30th. Those are unaudited mid-year fund balances. And then you can see the excess and deficit that exists within those funds. Really only 2 that show a deficit as of June. That's the Capital Improvement Fund and the Water Fund. In both of those funds, we've issued the bonds, and those are going to be shown in our July monthly report, so those deficits will be gone as of the July report. And then there's a couple funds carrying a little bit of extra fund balance. One of those is the Parking System Fund, which has about $1 million over its reserve policy. We've talked about using that for some of these capital needs I just talked about. And also Sewer Fund, carrying a fairly large excess fund balance of $7.9 million. So as part of next month's item on water sewer rates, they are going to propose a reduction to sewer rates to help offset the increase of water rates, which is made possible thanks to the excess reserve that exists in that fund. I think that covers. Yes.
So when we instead of doing a bond issue, we used, I think, 8 million from the general fund last year.
In 2023,
Yeah.
we did two things. There was one, for those projects that went over budget, we pretty much gave the money to the CIP fund to cover those project overages. So that was part one. And then part two, we did an advance from the general fund to the CIP fund to help pay the bills for those projects so they
Right.
move
So
forward.
did we reimburse the general fund when we got, is that in these numbers here?
Not yet, because the
Not yet,
bonds
'cause
aren't
that'll
there
be
yet.
in July?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So I think that the advance is shown here as part of the non-spendable fund balance, if I remember correctly. So that should go away as part of the 2024 audit. So 2024 audit. That covers my presentation. So happy to answer any other questions.
I want to note that my chair
Councilman
hand
Reed,
raised.
did you have a question?
I have a couple. One, thank you, Clayton and Hitesh and the whole team for the thorough presentation. One question. So you mentioned a $2.5 million loss from the state grocery tax. So what, we know that, with the state income tax, we get a disbursement from the state. But what disbursement are we receiving with the grocery tax?
So it's shown as part of the state sales tax line. The tax on groceries, the state doesn't tax groceries, but they do levy, I believe, a 2% tax, 1% going to the municipality and 1% going to the RTA. So
Okay.
it's that portion. And we are able to use IDOR data to look within our sales tax numbers to project how much of that is from groceries. So of our
Okay.
total, yeah.
And I wonder, I mean, I know that during COVID, the governor or the state legislature suspended the sales tax. So, and I don't know when that ended exactly. So did that not impact us during that period?
During that period, the state was continuing to make communities whole through their reserves. So they were providing, businesses weren't remitting the tax to the state, but they were remitting the numbers so that the state then knew how much to give to communities. So they were just paying those amounts on behalf of taxpayers and on behalf of grocery stores to make sure that communities were made whole during that time. And I think that's still in effect. So I think that hasn't sunset, and I'm not sure that'll sunset through 2026. So.
So I'm sorry.
Councilman
So
Reed,
that-
did you have another question?
Yeah, I do, but I'm still on this question. So you're saying that the state was remitting funds to municipalities like Evanston, but they
Yes.
don't plan with the new law to continue to remit funds to help make cities whole.
That is correct. 1/126, the tax sunsets and the contribution from the state sunsets as well.
Okay, so this is not a 2025 concern.
Right. The only thing they have done is, Councilmember Reed, that they are going to allow municipalities to pass the ordinance to introduce the local grocery tax. That's what they are trying to do. So yes, the municipalities will have to pass the ordinance and submit it by October 1st of 2025, and that tax would be effective as of 1/126.
Okay, well, I hope we don't go down that road. I'm curious about how our sales tax growth compares to, I don't know if there's some national average or if there's communities that we can compare ourselves to understand just if we're moving in the right direction.
I don't have that data readily available or something that I can share today. We know that most of the increases we're seeing are very, very much tied to inflation. If you read, and this is just anecdotal, again, so I don't have the data, so if you aren't looking for anecdotal data, then feel free to disregard. But if you look at other communities and the types of surpluses that they've been generating the last couple of years, it's very similar to us. You look at Arlington Heights and Schaumburg and some of those, many of our neighboring communities, they also had those operating surpluses that they weren't projecting as part of their budget, and it was largely due to these sales taxes, home rule sales taxes, and the impact of inflation. So we're definitely not alone in that regard in seeing these increases, but exactly how we compare, I'm not sure. The data is really readily available, so if there are, IDOR has a website that you can go to, anybody can go to and pick whatever communities they want to compare. So it's very accessible and easy to make that analysis.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to, if we can parse out what is to be expected due to inflation and what is maybe, as a result of economic growth, of new businesses opening, of more people shopping in Evanston. I think understanding the difference between the two would be helpful. So I'll leave that there and hope that we can figure out some methodology for doing that in the future. Another question that I get a lot from residents is, and I know we're going to have Director Kano and Daryl King and the team come next meeting. So maybe I'll save it for them and I'll just throw it out there, maybe so they're prepared for it. But I think I'm just curious to re-engage in the conversation about water sales opportunities. My mind is blanking at this moment about where we left that. I think what I normally tell folks is I don't think there's much opportunity to increase the number of clients that we have. But do you have a quick answer for that? Or is that something to say for Daryl King and
Yeah, I mean,
Edgar?
it could come up and you can bring up, but yes, as far as I don't know, I mean, internally, even the staff, because obviously after we added Morton Grove, Niles, Lincolnwood, Skokie was already there, and Northwest Water Commission, which serves to the water, I think 5. And I don't know whether we can draw more from the IDNR, from the Lake Michigan. So, but yeah, I think Daryl King or what's the name? Edgar Kano could answer those questions, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then last question I have is, I know that as of maybe last year, this council had rolled off roughly, $26, $27 million of debt. Where does that number stand today?
I mean, every year we generally pay $10 to $12 million in debt. That's the kind of a average, So if you consider, like suppose we were telling you, since we last issued bond in 21, I think summer of 21, we paid off roughly 10 to 12 in 21, 22, 23, and this year, again, right around that. So every year, that's the kind of an average.
But we just issued 30.
We issued the bonds. So yes, you can add up, but in case you are thinking that what if we are rolling off every year? So it ranges from that,
Oh, okay.
Any more questions, Councilman Reed? Councilman Kelly, did you have a?
Can I get just one?
Sure.
Maybe I didn't understand that. And Clayton, I know we've discussed this in the past. So when thinking about the total number that this council has rolled off in debt, can someone repeat that number for me again?
We pay off roughly $10 to $12 million in principal. So that's a reduction of the debt every year. Mm-hmm. I can give you the number from the audit report, what was our outstanding GO bonds.
So we're looking at roughly 30 million thus far, and maybe at the end of the year.
And this year, in December, every December 1st, we pay the principal.
Okay. And then that has led to an annual savings of what, $1 million, $2 million?
I mean, in terms of debt service, if you consider right now when we issued 24 bonds, I mean, the rates were higher, so the interest was almost 50% of the principal amount. So in that sense, if you consider that like 10 million versus 40 to 50%, even in the low environment, like 2.5% to 3% interest rate, the overall interest over 20 years comes down to around 40% of the principal. So yeah, we are saving quite a bit of money, but yes, we finally issued the bonds due in 24. And the debt service, debt service ranges overall around 17 to 18 million. We abet out of the TIF funds, water, sewer, parking funds. So it stays right around 12 to 13 million dollar as a debt service levy.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I just have one last comment, and I just want to highlight, that the team shared that our parking fund makes an annual transfer to our general fund. And I think sometimes folks, we had a discussion last night at council where, that parking revenue goes to the parking fund. Yes, it does, but it also supports our general fund. And we have to make sure that we're putting our assets to work, that we are using our parking fund, our parking infrastructure effectively and charging effectively for it, so we can make sure that things like housing are more affordable for our residents, things like groceries are more affordable for our residents. And I think that aligns with our CARP goals. And I've seen far too often that folks, I think misunderstand the potential of our parking infrastructure and undervalue it and give it away for free when it's, doesn't align with CARP, doesn't align with our health goals. Folks need to be walking more, for health reasons. And so we need to make sure that we're utilizing our parking infrastructure to help both support that infrastructure, but also support our general fund. And so I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Kelly, did you have a
Oh,
question?
thank you. Yeah, just a couple of questions. I didn't have time to go through the mid-year summary in great detail, but I just checked a few numbers, and maybe you could just explain. So, for example, I noticed with the ambulance service, we budgeted 3.2 million, and then when I looked in the audit, and I compared a few of these numbers with the audit, I noticed we brought in about 5 million last year from ambulance service. So I'm just curious, like how or why we would budget 3.2 million when we brought in about 5 million last year, according to the audit.
I believe that combines,
I think that combines in the audit ambulance plus GEMT, and this number would just be the ambulance excluding GEMT, which is a separate line a little bit lower at the bottom of that table.
Okay.
Yeah, so we split those out in this table, but I think those are combined in the audit.
Okay.
our
we
audit
can-
typically consolidates a number of accounts in a number of places so that it's not 1,000 pages long. So I'm
Got
guessing
it.
that's one area where they
Okay, so
consolidated.
We
that
can
would be the
confirm that,
GMT.
but that seems about the same figure based on, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And then with regard to the PPRT, where are we in terms of what we budgeted for it?
So
I-
our year-to-date, 1.5 million. Our budget, 3.5 million.
Okay.
So
thank you.
we're
I'm
less
sorry.
than
Thank you.
50% of budget
Got it. Thank you. Okay. That's as of June.
as
Yeah.
of June, correct?
Great. Okay. And then with regard to the property transfer taxes, don't we have an idea usually at a certain point, like with regard to closings, that we can get a better year-end estimate?
Those
Where will-
typically happen within 30, 45 days after we're made aware of them. So as we get closer to the end of the year, we can look at that and see if there's anything big pending.
Okay, that would be great. Because
so
I feel like a
that's-
lot of times we don't get that until the next year, but that would be great if, based on those dates that we are made aware of, the hopes that we'll be closing, to have a better idea of where we'll stand with regard to the property transfer tax.
Yeah, for instance, here in 2021, we had a huge sale in November that maybe we were aware of, maybe not aware of, right around October, November, when we're working with council on budget. So certainly something we'll take a look at as we get close to budget.
Okay. And then with regard to vacancies, I expressed a lot last night at APW. I am very concerned about our 8% vacancy rate, or wherever it's at. I think we are spending probably more in outsourcing frequently with third-party firms due to not, hiring engineers and others. So I think that is something that we really need to, and also, as I mentioned last night, not only do we save money if it's in-house and we get those hires, we're paying for them, it's overall better service for our residents. So I think that is a concern that needs to be looked at to see how we can really strategize to address that, both for financial reasons and others. Thank you, that's all.
I had one additional question. On the fund balance sheet, which is page 17, it's where, the detailed one that shows the American Rescue Plan is my question. We had talked before that there were 3 projects that we were concerned about that we might not get the money spent on or properly committed to by the end of the year. There was the theater, there was an affordable housing project, there was somebody, what's the and maybe we're going to talk about this in the next meeting, what's the status? Do we view there's any at-risk money now? Do you know how that's?
I don't have an update. We can have Sarah Flax attend a future
Okay.
meeting. I know
Yeah, I
that they
think we
have
should do it
been-
in September.
We should do that in
'cause we don't want
September,
to lose that money.
particularly with respect to the theater, because I think that was the one that was most at risk.
Can address that. I have had a discussion with the theater folks, and they are fully confident that they will be able to spend their $2 million by the end of the year. So that one should be off the table, but I think it would be appropriate to
Having
have a.
having an update.
And
So-
I can also share that they're coming up with a ARPA contingency plan as well. So there are a handful of projects that, mostly generally capital projects, that we can allocate the money towards should any of these other projects fall apart. and
Like
not
the
move
fire
forward.
truck. I think that was another one that was clearly,
Right. Right.
we could just fund that fire truck with this. Okay. There's no way. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, but we need to look over it. I just had a quick question on the parking. Is that's not a CIP, that's more of out of the general fund, and what do you think that expense could be? That was on page 9.
Page 9. Which,
It's these are funds with significant capital needs with no dedicated revenue.
okay. So in the parking fund.
Right there, yeah.
They have some aging infrastructure, the arms at the parking garages, some of the pay stations. I mean, a lot of that stuff's getting really, really old. And so that's what they plan on coming to talk to you all about in September.
So we'll have
as
more
part of the budget.
information. I just didn't know if it was like hundreds of thousands or what it is.
It is,
Okay.
yeah. It's all the inside parts of all those garages. And they do have, fortunately, a $1 million excess reserve, and we're encouraging them to use that and draw that down before they, but I think it's closer to $2 million or more in capital needs that they're looking to do.
Okay, so we'll cover that in September. Any other questions? Thank you for your thorough work on this, and it's nice to get an update through June, and we look forward to next quarter when we have that revenue come in, so.
Our
Sorry, this
data is so
Councilmember
much
Burns.
better.
I have a
Yeah.
hand up online.
Councilman Burns?
Burns, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, a few questions. So where is it at? Hold on. So the 2 point says, in talking about the grocery tax, it says, I think it's saying in 2026, this can be reduced by 2.4 million. So we're saying we're bringing in roughly on average 2.4 million in this tax, and we'll lose that in 2026.
That is correct. If the city council does not adopt a local grocery tax by October 1st of next year, then we would see a decrease in 2.5 million in our sales taxes.
Okay, and then the PPRT is down 42%. I'm reading here that it says Illinois Municipal League projects that these decreases will persist in FY 2025. Do they have any projections on what will happen in 2026, or is it too early for them to know?
I think we've only got 2025 numbers at this point, nothing for
Okay.
2026.
And I tried to quickly read through an explanation as to why there's such a decrease, not really understanding that. Could you give me, why is it down 42%?
Yeah, I am
What
not
happened?
a,
Is there some changes in state policy? Like what led to that decrease?
I think, Councilmember Burns, I think here's the note we can share with you. I think, and what happened is last couple of years, I think we got some more money than the other because they found something. Now they're, I think, diverting that money somewhere else. So we continue to see the decline this year as well as the next year. But again, yeah, it's like at the state's discretion, like they do with the local government distributive fund in terms of our income tax share. But at least they explain something, and this is what we have. We can share with the council too. Yeah,
So are we getting 3.1? Is that our number?
No, it's something different, yeah.
That's not
Right,
our number?
yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just concerned because in 2026, we're losing 2.4 million, and then the PPRT is down 42%. It's going to continue to decrease in 2025. What's happening in 2026? That's kind of where I'm going with that.
Yeah,
But
we
I
don't
guess
know
we can-
until, yeah, I mean, they could change these things. We have seen these kind of swings up or down in the income tax, particularly with the
Yeah.
local. So, and again, when you mention the grocery tax, yes, council still has the powers, as that's what the state did, to pass the ordinance to kind of replace that lost revenue with the local grocery tax.
And then we are, I mean, including the 11 million, which that is real money that we should include, is the way to think about this is we are not projecting a deficit for next year.
I mean, these are the numbers without the set because we didn't have the direction from the thing. So we just, yeah, these projections, lower end positive doesn't include 11 million in Northwestern. But yeah, most likely we could end up with kind of potentially no deficit.
But that's for this year, right?
Just
For next
1
year,
year.
we're still looking at what we talked about before, a $4 million increase in the pension contribution.
That's right, yes.
Right, and if, so we're still probably in that $5 to $10 million
Deficit.
base case deficit, but it's better, because we have, we don't have to use reserves because of the 11, but we do have a big unfavorable that came up in the $4 million incremental pension, and that's why we want to reforecast
And
it
again,
and
I
build
think, I
that
don't know
into our
whether we have
projections.
adjusted. This 11 million is the gross revenue. Obviously, we'll have to adjust for the lost revenue, some of the expenses which Sarah Flex in community development would need for inspections and others. So yeah, there is potential.
Do you know what those expenses approximately?
Do you know the
Million?
We ballparked it around $1 million.
$1 million total?
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure because anytime anytime people hear deficits, they get concerned, rightfully so. So I want to make sure that we provide a clear statement as to where we are this year and where we think we'll be next year, and if we've made any improvements, which I think was just kind of suggested by Member Livingston, that we communicate that clearly to the public, because we have this kind of back and forth discussion on which works for us, right? We're able to keep up with it all, but I think it would be helpful to just make sure that at the end of these discussions, we just provide a very clear statement about where we're projected for the end of this year as well as next year, which is why I asked. So thank you.
Right, okay.
Committee Member McMillan?
I just want to be sensitive when we talk about the additional 4 million due to the salaries affecting the pension payments. Let's also point to things like the $2.7 million purchase of Little Beans, the, $10 million for a animal shelter. Let's also throw those into the mix. I mean, because I don't think we ever want to just connect the two.
Right, but I'm just trying to reference it to this year's deficit. But
Right,
yeah,
but,
I agree.
you
There's a
know,
lot of
2.7 up there.
moving pieces.
Right.
But and
So-
even though we are, likely still looking at having to find some reductions or using excess reserves, we are putting $30 million into the pensions. We are
Right.
doing a lot
Well-
of work to try to get to those much lower liability numbers
Right,
in the future.
and I think we need
This
to,
is when it's
I
hard.
think part of our jobs is to message things to the public as well, that this is something that's an investment in the future of Evanston. Things that come up like the purchase of Little Beans, I don't know where that stands. It certainly isn't.
And that's why we have a policy. Just to summarize here, the low end, negative 11.6. If we add 10 to that, it'd be about a negative 1.6 on the high end, plus 6, but we'll have 6 million, but we'll have a better idea at 9:30. So
Yeah.
this is really helpful information
Right.
for us as a
But
committee.
I guess my point is, I do think the city could do a better job of kind of giving itself some props for doing what we did on the pension and showing people with numbers how that's going to work down the track.
Definitely, and it is an investment in the future of the pension, because if we had let it continue, it's going to be the next generation that would have paid for it. So we are on track, and a lot of hard work out there.
And Chair Rikus, if I may, I think we need to be careful because Little Beans is in the fact that it's primarily focused on kind of early childhood development, youth development, quite literally also is investing in our future. And so let's be careful here. We've discussed policies at previous meetings that should be adopted by council.
I guess my point, Bob, Councilmember Burns, is that, there's things that are budgeted and then unbudgeted, and, we should have a lot of scrutiny on things that aren't budgeted.
There are one-time expenses, and then there's things that are going to impact our budget for years to come, right? So,
right.
Again, let's be careful with how we talk about this. It's a lot more nuanced than what can fit into sound bites.
I would just hate to see us ever make the, pensions a political football.
No, I understand.
Unbudgeted
Neither do I
expenses,
want
I'm not so, worried about, but,
nor do I want our centers that support, early childhood development and our youth and families to be politicized either. So, but thank you.
Yeah,
And then
I just think you
wanna
should
say
have
a
one
quick-
heck of a high level of scrutiny on something that's unbudgeted. And I'm glad we passed, the limits on that.
And I also just want to say to Councilmember Kelly's point, I don't know if the Finance and Budget Committee is the appropriate venue for this, but I think if we're concerned about vacancies, we need to, what happens after that? What clear direction can we give to staff? What information do we need? Again, there are a lot of municipalities that are struggling, as we learned last night, to hire engineers, to hire for a lot of positions. And so again, we can continue to express concerns, but what are we going to do about it, right? We're not advocates without influence. We're elected officials, or we sit on committees as volunteers. So what action do we want the city to take? What do we want them to do differently? What information do we want to request? Let's think about that as we follow up on that issue.
Don't you have some monies that you've given to various contractors or various consultants for hiring people that we haven't utilized? I thought there was, for positions that never were filled. Maybe I'm wrong.
And I think I need to respond. So, Bobby, I have requested to understand what strategies that the city is using now and plans to use to improve our hiring. It is costing a lot. Firms are able to hire engineers. I think we need to do better recruitment by going to universities, by going to Purdue, by going to places where they graduate folks that have the kind of background and degrees that we're looking for. So I am working on that angle, and I think I hope I'm making my voice heard on that. So I hope we do start to see, and I think we are going to see some improvements, I hope, because it is costly, and again, but it's cost us more than hiring to the outsourcing that we're doing.
Well, thank you. We've had a great discussion. Thank you, Clayton and Hitesh and Michael, for all your work on this. And this brings us to D4, discussion regarding the 2023 IMRF financial data. That was brought up at the City Council meeting, wanted to bring here. Hitesh, you want to give us your thoughts on that? Do we need a motion?
So move.
Second.
I mean, as requested by the Finance Budget Committee, I think last time we said that, yes, definitely we can. And I think even I mentioned that going forward, we can use the current year. The only thing I think you guys heard, that potentially if the IMRF audit is delayed, that could delay our audit. But if the committee and the council wants to include the latest data, so when we do the next audit in 24, we will include IMRF report for 24 too. But this is the number, where's the report? Can you just bring up that page? And I think the relevant page here is, I think the page, go further down, I think the 15th page of that report, where let me see which page. But again, yes, I can tell the council committee right now that, for the next audit, we will wait for the IMRF audit to be finished and then use that number in our audit.
So can I just say one thing? I think, I think one thing about IMRF, it's important to recognize this is a fundamentally different pension plan from our perspective than police and fire. It's a multi-employer plan. We pay it like a bill, right? They manage it to 100% funding over time, And so I think knowing specifically where this plan is relative to funding and what's going on with contributions and benefits and actuarial assumptions is a little bit less significant than it is with the funds that are actually on our balance sheet of the public safety ones. So I would, I think if it's a year in arrears, I think it's less critical than we would never want our public safety pension plan information in the audit not to be the most current. But IMRF is just a little bit different. It's almost, from our perspective, more like a 401k than the public safety plans.
But we'll still include, I don't mind. I mean, I think this time the report finalized, I think, in May end. So we'll take the chance, but I think it happened many years back. Since then, so many communities decided to kind of, use the 1 year behind. But yeah, we can continue to we can start using the current.
Unless there's a crunch. If
Correct,
it's
yeah.
not out till June 20th, then we'll have to do it. But Councilman Kelly, did you?
Yeah, no, that's terrific. I'm glad to hear that. And I know City Manager Stowe has submitted referral, and I believe Councilmember Reed and myself both co-sponsored to ensure that, the GASB numbers come out in March, and then the audit at the end of May, and those numbers, if you look back, have not differed. So even relying on the GASB numbers in March, and then if something were to change with the audit, you could change it. But those numbers have, it's been surveyed. I think we looked at the last 10 years, and there hasn't been a change from the March GASB to the audit numbers in May. So I think, we can effectively use those numbers for our audit, which usually is in June or July. So great.
Okay,
That's great. to
That's
hear.
resolved. So next month, we're going to do CIP, ARPA, water, and parking, right? Those are kind of the agenda items. And participatory budgeting wanted to come back to us from the city council. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Here.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilman Reed, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I just want to, I would love to, as you know, the meeting's going to be in September, budget's going to be coming out fairly soon thereafter. Last year, I made a referral to, maybe not a formal referral, I don't know, maybe it was a referral, but to have Northwestern pay for fire service. Our fire chief said that he was going to work on negotiating with Northwestern over the course of this year and come back to us. I've heard, and so I think it's important that we have that update because that's a potentially significant source of revenue for the city.
I think Tim Schoolmaster's also on the line, no?
Oh,
Well, if I can just get a response. And
is that
as a-
something you can bring to us, or?
I'm not sure where that stands, so I would want to check with Manager Stowe and Chief Pollitt before saying, sure. I mean, we only have a week and a half to turn around the agenda, so.
Okay,
So it,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm just not sure where that stands.
Okay, we'll do the best we can, Councilman Reed. So,
just
do I have
even an
adjourned?
update on their efforts,
You've got, I think, Mr. Schoolmasters has had his hand raised.
Is-
Second.
Wait, are you on there, Mr. Schoolmaster?
I am for quite some time. Just recently joined you, though.
Yeah, we're done with public comment, but did you have something quickly to say, because we're about to adjourn?
Okay, earlier today when I sent you the actuarial, I had some analysis and commentary that I asked you to share with the members of the committee. Were you able to do that?
We sent the report out, we just got it, so. I didn't send the whole email because there was,
My analysis and commentary on some of the things that were included in that. And I understand you adopted the actuarial the way it is, and I applaud that, a very wise decision.
okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're
We're
adjourned.
adjourned. Thank you.
So did you distribute those?
Let's talk about it after, okay?
Good night, everyone. Thank you.